Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we convene our third of 5 sessions on the future of God. The phenomenon of God is increasingly complex in our increasingly postmodern, scientifically determined world. So these are very important domains of human inquiry. I want to start today with something that I heard on the news earlier from Al Jazeera. There was a commentator that was commenting on 1 year of war in Gaza, and he was making the point through a series of statistics that he put on the screen that essentially in the second half of the Second World War, as the Allies had clearly turned the tide, and the United States and Britain, for the most part, began to blanket bomb Germany. You've all probably heard of the Dresden firebombing, where they just came in and scorched the entire city. And tens of thousands of people were incinerated in a few nights of carpet bombing. You've heard of the carpet bombing, the firebombing of Tokyo after the surrender of the Germans, but before the Japanese surrendered in 1945. Of course, you've heard about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And what the journalist was saying, that is, if you take all those bombings, Germany, Japan, including the 2 nuclear bombs, they came to 56,000 tons of bomb. 56,000 tons of bombs to bring Germany and Japan to its knees by obliterating civilians. In the last 365 days, in the 1 year that the Israelis have been engaging in the war against Gaza, they've dropped not 56,000 tons, but 85,000 tons of explosives on an area 5 miles by 20 miles with 2.3 million people. That is almost beyond genocide. That is a self-conscious obliteration of an entire people. And the fact that there's anyone left is a miracle. And it was only yesterday that Benjamin Netanyahu said that they were going to do the same thing to Lebanon. The high-tech massacre of civilians, the world religions. And it's very important to remember that during the Second World War, and while the Germans were engaging in the Holocaust, Pope Pius XII said nothing. The mainstream churches, the mainstream synagogues are essentially, in the face of genocide in Gaza, saying nothing. There are important individual exceptions. There are the Jewish young people, the Jews for Peace. But by and large, those religious institutions that are supposed to sit closer to God than we mere mortals are watching what's happening in silence. And I think that needs to be called out as we contemplate the phenomenon of God, the relationships between the religions and divinity. And bearing in mind, as we see among the evangelicals today, as the evangelical church in Germany were actually complicit and enthusiastic supporters of what was happening then, as they support Israel in its genocide now. So how we frame this in terms of the existing program, I leave to Tom Eddington and Michael Putz, but it just feels to me that world events are crowding in to our living rooms through our television sets and social media, and demanding that whatever else we think is going on and whatever other priorities we would like to attend to, we're being challenged in the spirit of Martin Niemöller, when he said, "And they came for the Jews, I did nothing. They came for the communists, I did nothing. They came for the gypsies, I did nothing. And now they've come for me. And who will do anything?" We're in one of those moments, everyone, where the air is being taken out of the room. And we're being confronted by the stark reality of what we human beings are doing, to ask very deep questions about our relationship to each other, our relationships to the larger ecology, and ultimately and fundamentally, our relationship to the holy, however we conceive that to be. So thank you, everyone, for joining Humanity. 1,000 tons on Gaza.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Part of the framing for today's conversation is the global polycrisis. And the reality is that as a species, we were, or at least we framed it, that we were given dominion over the earth. And that has been stretched to our believing that we have domination over the earth. And as a result, the human species, has created the polycrisis that we're all living in. And so I'm absolutely delighted to be back in conversation again today about the future of God. And I welcome back Michael Putz. Michael, thank you for helping orchestrate this week, and absolutely delighted to have a very dear friend, Father Joshtrom Kureethadam, joining us from Rome. And looking forward to this conversation. For those who have had a chance, or haven't had a chance rather, to see Father Josh on a couple of other programs we've had here at Humanity Rising. Father Josh is the author of the 10 Green Commandments. He has a number of courses he teaches at the Pontifical University in Rome on ecology, and is just an extraordinary human being. And just so delighted to have you with us today, Father Josh.
Thank you.
Michael, any opening comments before we...
Yes, thank you so much, Father Joshtrom. And you didn't even mention his contribution to the Pope Francis Encyclical Laudato Si as well. So you've been a great speaker about that, and sort of a global advocate for the Laudato Si movement, which you helped foster for the Pope. What I wanted to say briefly is that just to say, for people who are just joining us today, who haven't been earlier in the week, we've had a couple of wonderful speakers, and I just want to sort of bring in what they shared, I thought was relevant to our conversation to build on. On the first day, Rabbi Kat, I think she spoke very passionately about her view of social justice, that, God requires us to act. And for her, social justice action is greatly enhanced by the belief in God, by her abiding view of presence of God that fuels her work, it guides her work, and it makes a huge difference for her and her community in their work. So God is an important part of not just a commandment to serve other people, but also to fuel and inspire her in her work, and also give her a long-term perspective that sometimes some of the efforts we make may not be seen in our lifetime or our children's lifetime, and that a spiritual perspective in God has helped give her a long view of the work that she's doing and gives her soul some comfort. And I think Michael Nagler yesterday gave us a wonderful presentation, and he spoke about a developmental perspective, that humanity is going through different phases of spiritual development. And he mentioned the process where oftentimes we encounter God in nature, then we encounter God in community, then we encounter God within. And I thought that was a very powerful discussion. It brought in the developmental aspect of things. And I think that is part of the process of the Jim. And I think then bringing Jim's comments together here is that humanity is going through these processes of encountering God in new ways. Different parts of humanity and different people in the same community are encountering God in different ways in their maturity. And sometimes we fall far short of what we know we should do. And we're being called to grow as a human race and to live up to whatever particular faith tradition is challenging us, which is usually within love, caring for others, respect, nonviolence. We're all challenged. And I just wanted to say one other thing. One of the things that Jim has done a very powerful job of doing is mentioning how often times in the past, religion and empire were fused together. Even the Roman Catholic Church began a Roman Catholic Church. There was empire and religion fused together in an awkward glance. But I think those days have changed quite radically. And so I don't think that we can say, like, for example, the Christian church is empire and church fused together, and perpetrating problems. But now the challenge, and I think, Father Joshtrom, you can speak much more eloquently than I can. Pope Francis has been up front for speaking out for those who are marginalized, those who have been hurt by not just religious violence, but secular violence, whether the Uyghurs in China or the war in Ukraine or the famine in South Sudan. And the Holy Father really does speak up about the fact that even if that we can't just turn aside, even if it's not our direct responsibility. We need to care for others that we may not think of as our neighbors, that all people on the earth are our neighbors, and that the church, there's active harm and there's the harm of not speaking out and reaching out to people. And I think you can speak quite eloquently to that, especially in your specialty of caring for the earth. Speaking out for the animals, the planet, the biosphere, for all peoples all over the world. And so I'm honored to have you here and to be able to speak for what you and the Holy Father are doing, to try to be advocates, not just for the Christian tradition, but ecumenically across the world for the care of the planet. So I'm really honored to have you here, Father. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. A great joy to be with Humanity Rising family, and I thank Tom and Michael especially for the invitation. This morning, as I was praying and then preparing for our session, I thought it's important to begin by experiencing God. It's like we can speak of a good dinner for hours in the house, but it's another thing altogether, enjoying the dinner. So I thought of proposing to you a very small meditation wherever we are seated right now, in which we will go through two phases, the moment of joy and a moment of pain. So I invite you to close your eyes. Think of the image of the earth rising. We are in the Humanity Rising program. In 1968, Apollo 8, the penultimate crew, that landed on the moon later, the one just before that, they were tasked with the job of photographing the moon. And as they were photographing the moon, all of a sudden, they found the Earth rising in the horizon. And the astronauts later speaking about it, they said this was the most beautiful thing they had ever seen. So most of you would have seen that photo of the Earth rising, but now I invite you to imagine it. One planet in an infinitely vast universe. The universe has a diameter of 93 billion light years. Imagine how vast, immense it is. Nearly 2 trillion galaxies like our own Milky Way, with at least 230 billion solar systems. And we are just one little planet in that. Imagine we are in this home. Now I want you to listen to John, Gospel of John, chapter 3, verse 16. God so loved the world that he sent his only son. God so loved the world. And this earth was prepared for life. And as far as we know, ours is the only planet where life exists anywhere in the universe, as of now, as far as we know. That this planet was prepared to be a home for life over 4.52 billion years, bathed in God's love. And life begins around 3.9 billion years ago from the cyanobacteria. The evolution of life moves forward. And just 200,000 years ago, the Homo sapiens sapiens, that's what we are. We are all Homo sapiens sapiens. Just one race, one humanity. Then we spread into the other parts of the world, originating in Africa, Eastern Africa. Then we spread out into the other parts of the world. The first group to reach Australia around 55,000 years ago. On the way, Asia, India, many other places, China. Around 40,000 years ago into Europe. Around 35,000 years into Siberia, Russia. And just 14,000 years ago through Alaska, into North America and right down. How as a family, we occupied, we inhabited this common home, along with thousands, millions of other species. Imagine this one biotic human, biotic family living together, bathed, as I said, in God's love. Let's spend a few moments breathing in God's love. Genesis 1:2 says, the Spirit of God hovered over the waters at the beginning of creation. God's love poured into our hearts, as St. Paul says. And each one of us is loved. Isaiah 49:15 says, even before you were formed in your mother's womb, I loved you. I knew you. That even if a mother forgets the child of her womb, I will never, never forget you. So this immense love of God for each one, for the entire planet that God so loved, for every human, every living being. Now I want to lead you to the second part of our meditation. We could recall the very powerful words of Jim right at the beginning. What we have made of this home, what we have made of this family. Jim spoke of the war in Gaza. They say at least 56 wars are being fought around the world. And with so much of pain, so much of suffering, few months ago, I confess, I literally cried when I saw a little child, a girl child in Gaza, unable, very, 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 going through famine, very starved and very emaciated. And she had diabetic because there was not sufficient food to eat. I think of people in South Sudan, 1 million staring at famine. And let's bring to our minds, thousands, millions of our brothers and sisters suffering around the world. Our own sisters and our own brothers. And we see the planet suffering. Millions of other species suffering. And let's remain with this pain. Let's not deny this pain. And I want to conclude this meditation with just another minute of meditation. Saint Augustine, who said, the two daughters of hope are, first of all, it is courage. It is courage for things to change. So let's hope that we can have the courage that things can change. And the second daughter is anger, a holy anger, that this is not what God wanted. This is not God's dream for humanity. This is not God's dream for the entire planet. This is not the way we are supposed to live together as a common human family. And all this is work of our own hands, both the destruction of the planet and the destruction of human and biotic communities. And I want to end remembering John 2:17. Jesus enters the temple of Jerusalem, which is supposed to be a house of prayer. And what does Jesus find? Jesus finds the temple, people who are buying and selling, merchants, money lenders, people shouting. It has become a business place, a market, as he calls it. And Jesus gets very angry. He makes a cord and he starts chasing people away. The only time we find in all the Gospels Jesus getting very angry. I want to conclude on this note of holy anger. Pain, anger about the state of the world, about the state of the planet. Let's spend 3 seconds feeling this pain, feeling this holy anger before we begin our conversation. May I invite you all to gently open our eyes and we can begin our conversation in God's own presence. I've been asked to speak about God, Christianity, and the Polycrisis. Allow me to begin. Of course, Michael and Tom, you are anytime, please feel free to guide me. You are my shepherds today, so so please do guide me. But then I will just begin with a small reflection on this.
I just want to jump in real quick, Father Josh, and say thank you so much for invoking the image of Earth rising. It's just such an iconic photograph that pierces the heart of any human being when we see that picture. So thank you for bringing that into our consciousness today. Please go forward.
Thank you, Tom. Let's allow me to begin our conversation. I really wish it'd be a conversation with you and with all those who are taking part in this session. I've been asked to speak on God, Christianity, and the Polycrisis. And allow me to begin with the last part, the Polycrisis. Jim spoke very eloquently, and thank you, Jim, for pouring out your heart. And I think we are, humanity has gone through crises, from the time we evolved. We have gone through many, many crises. But I teach philosophy of science, history of science, and so we are privileged to have a very, very wide view. And though I think we are in a very, very, very critical moment, where all these crises are coming together. I am associated with the Laudato Si of Pope Francis, this encyclical letter on the care for our common home. And Pope Francis speaks about, two cries, the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. And the cry of the earth is the precarious state of our common home. And all of us are familiar with the manifestations, the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, depletion of natural resources, pollution, so many of those, and that's frightening. It's not just one crisis that we can solve. There are so many crises put together. And periodically, yesterday, one important study came out that said out of 35 vital signs about I'm sure most of you have read it or seen it at least, out of 35 vital signs, in 25 we have entered a very critical situation. 25 out of 35. That's very, very concerning. But the other side is what we call the cry of the poor. It's who are the ones suffering most on account of the climate crisis, on account of war, and all this misery we have created are the poor, and who are suffering disproportionately. I think of people in Bangladesh or people in Congo, elsewhere, who when they face the climate crisis, it's not the same. I spoke about South Sudan. This summer, nearly for 2 weeks, all the schools in South Sudan were closed because of a heat wave. Now, it's not the same heat wave happening in California or elsewhere, or in Rome. We have air conditioning, or we have food in the fridge, or when a heat wave strikes South Sudan and people go hungry, it's life-threatening. And in many parts of the world, I think of the summer in North India. I come originally from India, where over 1,000 people died because of the heat wave. So people are suffering. So this is what we call the cry of the poor. And it's important to connect both this. And that's, I think, what we call the polycrisis. It's an ecological crisis. It's a socio-economic crisis. And allow me to conclude this part on the polycrisis, speaking of the third dimension of it. I think that's what I think Michael will be happy to hear this. It's the spiritual perspective. It is, if there is degradation outside, it's because there is degradation within us. Pope Benedict, the Pope just before Pope Francis, the day he became Pope, I remember in his homily, he made a very, very insightful remark. He said, the external deserts are expanding because the internal deserts have become so vast. So both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor are happening, the many wars around the world, because there are wars within, all violence. In fact, Laudato Si, paragraph 2, Pope Francis begins by saying, the violence present in our hearts is also evident, consequently, in the degradation of the soil, in the pollution of the air, of water, of all this, I would say misery outside, of us, because there is degradation within. So that's how I understand the polycrisis. It's the ecological situation and so many of them, not just climate, but then probably the most urgent is climate, but also biodiversity and other species suffering. But it's also an ethical, moral crisis because the poor are suffering, the poor communities. And I think along with them, also our children, future generations. It's a huge responsibility that we have towards them. Then the third dimension of the polycrisis is the problem is within. It's because of the violence within our human hearts. Allow me to go to the second part, what Christianity can say about this. And here maybe I will try to enter into do a conversation also on the points that Jim raised. What can religions do? It's not just Christianity alone, of course. What can religions do? Religions in Latin, it comes from this word relegare, is to bind together. And I think religions are losing that capacity, or we have lost that vocation, or we have shirked that responsibility. In a time when we should be bringing unity, we should be bringing solidarity. I wish religions could involve themselves more. And this is especially evident when we go through crises like the present one. It's Gaza, as mentioned by Jim, but also the many other 56 wars I mentioned. Then also the suffering of the poor, and in front of all these injustices, I think religions have a very, very important responsibility to be agents of change, to bring unity, and it's important to speak out. As I said, this is a very, very critical moment. If we don't speak out, things can, as it happened with the Second World War, with the First World War. My sort of, as a theologian, an author whom I read very much is Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a Protestant pastor, one of the very few religious leaders who understood what was coming, who dared to dare Hitler, condemn Nazism before many others, and of course he paid the price. He paid the price for it, but then he stood up. So there are many. I invite all faith leaders, and I work a bit with Pope Francis, but very, very modestly. I'm a very, very, very low key service at the Vatican, and I'm more in the field of ecology, and I know how Pope Francis feels about it. Feels the pain, I should say. Ever since the war broke out in Ukraine, not a Sunday has passed when he has not mentioned the Ukraine in his Sunday Angelus at midday when he prays. Not a Sunday has passed. Ever since war broke out in Gaza, not a day has passed when he has not telephoned. We have a small Catholics are a minority there. We have a couple of priests working who didn't abandon the place, who are there with the people, and they're running the parish. And even yesterday, I was reading a reflection by one of these priests living there, about also from Lebanon. When this drones come, the noise and the fear you feel, and you don't know what's going to happen next. You can imagine living psychologically with this feeling over months now. And not a day has passed when Pope Francis does not telephone this priest in Gaza, who is with his people in the midst of suffering. And I think that's what Pope Francis would do. I don't think he's without courage, because what I like about Pope Francis, he can be very tender with the suffering, with the migrants, and with the sick. How fatherly, how compassionate he is. But I have found he can stand up to anyone. I've seen it, when some foreign dignitary presidents or others have come into the Vatican, and then he has He speaks truth to powers. I mean, I don't think he might have many drawbacks, but I don't think he's someone who lacks courage. And yeah, and he will speak up. And just on the 7th of October, 2 days ago, he invited the entire church to fast and pray for peace around the world, and especially, I'm sure, in the Holy Land, So I think that's what Christianity among the religions as represented, by Pope Francis. But I would allow me to, I think that gives a more balanced view. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a Protestant pastor who died in the concentration camp, paid the price for his courage. And what Pope Francis is doing. I mean, he has sent envoys to Ukraine so many times, and I'm sure he's trying. As far as I know of him, I can vouch that he's not a person who will stand back because he's not worried about his name or dignity and he's really concerned with the poor and the suffering. So. And so thank God we have figures like him in Christianity, And allow me to conclude, going back to where is God in all this? I think of Hansionas, a Jewish philosopher who wrote a very famous article after the Second World War, God After Auschwitz, when millions of people lost their lives during the Second World War. We could also think of today, where is God? And this is the question we keep on asking. The only answer I would, attempt, very with dread, is the example of Jesus Christ, whom I represent in the Catholic tradition. It's a God who didn't, avoid suffering, who accepted the cross, who was with the people. So if you were to ask me, where is God in Gaza? I would say in that small little parish that is hosting, and I'm sure most of them are Muslim families. I was reading, I said in Lebanon, when troubles began, they all rushed to Catholic churches, and they were all welcomed. I think God is there. God is there. With the people. And allow me to say also as a philosopher, I mean, sometimes it's very easy to, we can blame God or, it's natural, when a mother loses her only son, in this cruelty of the war, I'm sure, she will ask, where is God, But as a philosopher, I think it has to do with human liberty. I'm so happy that Kathy just wrote. I was anticipating that God has given people free will. And at time when I guide people and they ask me the same question out of pain, out of suffering, I tell them, God has given us liberty, and this liberty can produce a Saint Francis of Assisi, a Mother Teresa of Calcutta, or Hitler or a Mussolini, or say any dictator or any of these people, dropping bombs, or more than dropping bombs, or ordering for the bombs to be dropped. It's all depends on us. I mean, and otherwise, I mean, philosophically speaking, we would be just machines. We would be robots. God is controlling everything, and we are not free. So I think in a way, God is sending the ball back to us. In what way are you using the liberty? And allow me to conclude, going back to the image I began with, I think God's heart is paining much more than any of the human hearts now. Because, a God who created this beautiful garden, I teach cosmology, and, the more you study about the earth, this is a planetary garden. And what we are made of this garden. One phrase of Pope Francis I love, and he repeats it often. He says, God has given us a garden. God has gifted us a garden. We should not leave a desert to our children. That's in the context of ecology, in the early chapters of Genesis, when God creates the Garden of Eden, then we have, human sin, first in Adam and Eve, in not keeping this garden. Tommy mentioned about domination, that Genesis 1:28, and we have clearly misinterpreted it. Dominion was meant to be rather in the Hebrew sense, in God's way of domination, which is always a loving domination. We wouldn't call it even domination, it's caring, isn't it? Then Genesis 2:15, Adam and Eve are told to cultivate and keep this garden, and they don't do that. And that's the first original symbolic sin. Then chapter 4, when we have the first homicide in biblical history, when Cain lifts his hand against his own brother Abel and kills his own brother. I think, because Bible is it's not history as we know, it's mythical explanation. But then human violence goes back to it's unfortunately very, very deep roots. That as an ecologist or eco-theologian, it always strikes me that when Abel's innocent blood soaks the land, few words later we read the land turns barren, only thistles and thorns grow in this garden. So I think that beautifully puts together all this. Violence destroys the planet. Violence destroys our own fellowship, and so all account of human liberty. And and later in Genesis 7, I think it's verse 7, there's so much of violence, misery, suffering in the world that one of the saddest verses in the Bible, we read, God regretted for having created the humans. I think it's the lowest point, after the splendid opening chapters of Genesis, but then humanity out of liberty does not respond. And God arrives at a point where God regrets. But I don't want to close on this. Then follows from chapter 8 and 9, the story of Noah, one person who collaborates with God. That's where God sends, of course, biblically the great flood. But Noah is raised to protect his own family, but also every species. The Ark of Noah, again, a mythical explanation, but then where recreation begins because one person responded to God's loving plan. And creation is renewed and everything. So I want to close on this note, of pain that, this is the state of the world, but hope is like Noah, each of us, and I think that's what Humanity Rising is doing, so many Noahs around the world coming together so that we can turn the tide. And I hope I didn't speak too much, Michael and Tom. Over to you, please.
That was absolutely beautiful, Father Joshtrom, and thank you for sharing. I was reminded of reading Laudato Si back in 2016 and how Pope Francis connected care for our common home and for each other in a way that I hadn't seen written or shared anywhere. And I was permanently affected by the encyclical and the way that I understood what the world was facing, what humanity was facing, and what the opportunity was. And like that experience, I had that same experience today when you spoke to both the social injustice and the planetary injustice as a desert and the desert inside, and that reflection. And I really appreciate you making that connection for me and for our audience. It's very important, and it very much takes my thought to, as a species, I've held that we're adolescents. We're acting like adolescents in our consciousness and our way of being on the planet collectively. We're so desperately in need of moving into our adulthood. And like children, we've gotten ourselves in very deep trouble. And now metaphorically, it seems we're we're calling out to God, we're calling out to a higher power, we're calling out to somebody to come and save us. And so I'm wondering in this discussion today, where is there an opportunity for us to renew our faith, for us to allow God to nurture that desert within us, so that we can tend to the desert that we're all experiencing?
Yeah. No, thank you, Tom. Brilliant question. I think of Hölderlin is the poet who appears, every now and then in Heidegger's writings, And I like this German poet Hölderlin, and one of I think it's an essay on technology of Heidegger. He brings in Hölderlin and says, hope appears precisely in the moment of crisis. And that's hopeful that we have a God who can provide hope. I would say at least in three ways. First of all, a God who reveals oneself as community. It always inspires me to think of our God as a communitarian God, what we call the Trinity. And I wonder, I'm also so happy and grateful that that we have this God, in Christianity, not a God who is all by himself or herself, but a God who is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, which is a mystery, of course, but saying that God is community, and that's what we see around in everything, in ecosystem or in our own bodies. We have trillions of bacteria. We live in communities, and often I think we have a very static, mechanistic picture of the world, whereas the real world is alive, is made up of communities of various levels, So, and I think there in Christianity we have a great resource for this hope of a communitarian God, The second thing, again, speaking from the Christianity tradition, is the example of our own human communities. If you were to go to, after the church is born, after the experience of the Pentecost, it's already Acts of the Apostles 4:32. They describe the first community, the very first group of Christians, so to say, that was formed in Jerusalem. And it is said they had everything in common. And no one was in need because everything was shared. And I think Christianity and all religions need to recover the sense of community. That's a second element of hope. We can create, this community. And it always, pains me, our economy, the way it has grown, and even that the earth produces 130%, of food needed, It's not that we have scarcity. It's just that we don't share. If there is famine or, inequality, poverty around the world. And allow me to answer, some of you are very, very educated and enlightened, in this area of economics. One study that has been haunting me ever since I read it last year from Oxfam, just before the COP in Dubai. And that study said that 2/3 of all wealth created from 2020 around COVID has gone into the hands of the 1%. 2/3 of all wealth, imagine. So I think these problems begin because when people don't share, and in Polycrisis we say when there's inequality, it can lead to social tensions,
Yes.
and we are seeing polarization and people getting very angry, rightly. But then very subtly these roots are hidden, or people don't want to, because these are the people who have the media in their hands, communication, everything. So we need to recover this sense of community, and that gives me hope that in Christianity and around the world we find people coming together, I think, and Humanity Rising is an example. But that's one of the few things that really gives me hope now. Like I see indigenous people, women, children around the world coming together as communities, saying that we cannot go on like this. We need to recover our communities. And the third thing, again, I think it's sort of my way of putting it, we can create community within. That God can always renew us, and they say this phrase is there, no, that behind every saint there is a sinner. There's hardly any saint who was not a sinner before. Even someone like Francis of Assisi, who thought that he always asked pardon for his sins, and because we are all unworthy. But then we have people like Saint Augustine or Saint Paul who was killing the first Christians, and then he turns out. So we can create this community within us, this communion, this harmony within us. And that I think is the only solution for peace, and but then I wouldn't. Otherwise, the danger is So we need both. And Pope Francis, I know for one, what's in Laudato Si, keeps this tension, this complementarity, or complementary tension between personal action, personal transformation, and communitarian action and community transformation. So I think we need to keep both. Then going back to my original point, in all this, the model is the Holy Trinity, of this unity. So yeah, this is what gives me hope, and I think it's the way forward for humanity.
It's very powerful.
Yeah,
Father Joshtrum, I was really moved by all this, and and I have two two things that I want to explore with you. One of them is conceptual, and one of them is practical, and they're linked together, and I'm just going to say the first, which is the Laudato Si movement's been going on for over a decade, right?
Yeah.
And you've been an important leader in that effort, and I think I'd like to spend some time later just sharing the progress that's been made. We've talked about the 10 green commandments and maybe the 10 deadly sins of of the ecological deadly sins, but also the practical, not just exhortations and good words, but the practical things you and the Laudato Si movement have been doing around the world with Pope Francis. I think we'll explore more about that. But then the conceptual part of it, because it's not just, we're not just talking about concepts and philosophy, because concepts and philosophy have in some ways created that inner fragmentation ourselves. If we have a broken cosmology, a broken ontology, a broken philosophy, then we're broken within, and then we have a broken world without. And so, you've done such good work, and some of the people in the comments have been noticing the good work you've done on the philosophical roots of the ecological crisis because of Descartes. And I think people are very familiar with some of the separation of humanity from the nature, but also the idea that proper spiritually infused philosophy can actually help us come back together, and it has practical effects in the world. And the fact that the integral ecology movement, right? The integral ecology movement that Laudato Si is speaking about, I think there's just a small arc there between one of the things we shared in earlier conversations was there was an understandable reaction to theocracy, to empire and church, that like in the Western tradition, the Enlightenment was a separation of church and state. Now to try to fuse empire from religion and all of the negativity of that. The challenge is in that separation, if it didn't become a compatible marriage, it became an isolation where we basically we took the sacred out of the world, and thus we took the sacred out of ourselves, and we took the sacred out of nature, and thus we can turn it into inputs and outputs, things to be used without thinking about the fact that all of creation is sacred, right? And so there's an ecology that caused fragmentation. I mean, there's a philosophy that caused fragmentation, and then there's a philosophy and a spirituality that can bring together wholeness that repairs that. And so I wanted to speak briefly to the arc between, the Descartes and the crisis that caused the ecology, and how integral ecology can heal that. And then I'd like to spend the time we have remaining talking about the wonderful things Laudato Si's done in the last 10 years and what is on the agenda that you're speaking to today that people might want to hear about, that they can participate.
No, thank you, Michael. I will begin with sort of my one of my favorite topics. I did a PhD on that, and then went on teaching. I think of Albert Einstein, who, as we know, very famously said, "You cannot solve a problem with the same thinking, same mentality that created it in the first place." So I think our dilemma right now is this. That we are nowhere in resolving the ecological crisis, the socio-economic, violence in the world, because we are still with the old way of thinking. And in the case of ecology, I was able to trace it back to modernity, Bacon, but I found the real thinker behind is Descartes, because he presented himself as the new Aristotle. And modernity begins in a way with Aristotle, with Descartes, because he provides the metaphysics, he provides an epistemology, and then all the rest follow on that, anthropology, ethics, So I found the three pillars that Descartes, along with others, had to construct was the anthropocentric view, that we are the res cogitans, and again, humanity reduced to just rationality, whereas I think Aristotle was even richer. We are rational animals, so animal was still there. Whereas when we come to modernity, it's res cogitans, just thinking thing, And so and in the absolute centrality of the res cogitans, and all the rest don't matter. We are the center, and today we speak about anthropocentrism and the Laudato Si. We have reached the climax. We are the absolute center, and the damage is causing. And the second part is the mechanistic view of the natural world. What you just mentioned, Michael. We have desacralized everything, and even philosophically, the telos or the vitality that living world has been taken out. As I mentioned earlier, everything gets reduced to machines. So the modern physiology, modern science, modern physics, even modern economics follow that the earth is just a storehouse of resources to be mined, and then which in modern consumerism is use and throw, I forget the author who said our problem is not materialism, but the lack of respect for matter. We don't see anything anymore as sacred. We don't see earth or as God's creation. As where God's spirit is present. Or in Africa we speak of the ancestor spirit is still present. Indigenous communities are masters in this, and I think we need to sit at their feet. For them, land is sacred because it's their gods dwell there, and also for them, land is always the community that owns the land. Just the other day, I was seeing a picture of them thatching a house where the entire community was involved, and the joy of being together, So that's going back to the mechanistic vision of the natural world. And the third, I think, the most fundamental is the dualistic divide. There is nothing connecting res cogitans with res extensa. And there begins modern metaphysical dualism. Plato spoke of a dualism, but it was more anthropological within the human being, whereas in Descartes we have a metaphysical dualism, so unless we connect that, we realize that we are not the center, we are part of the whole. Again, we are coming back to, I think, providentially to the theme of unity, So I think then the second part of this reflection would be what Thomas Kuhn called the paradigm shift. I think our challenge today, and I am personally convinced that unless we put together a new paradigm, things won't change. And paradigm already for Thomas Kuhn, he used the example of astronomy, where he said astronomy was not making progress because it was geocentric. Earth is the center. Then naturally, we got stuck there until Copernicus and then Galileo came and said, no, sun is the center. They still thought of the universe as a solar system. And from that moment, astronomy began to grow, in leaps and bounds, and interestingly, Thomas Kuhn says it was not just a cosmological problem, because it took nearly a century for the paradigm to change, because it contradicted the Bible, for example. Those who literally interpret the Bible, that Joshua had stopped the sun. So if the Earth is not the center, how could that happen? So all those problems, because a paradigm has so many components: an economic component, a political component, a spiritual component, an educational, as many components that put together. It's maybe the culture, what we call, and we have to change this paradigm. We cannot go on with this present economy, which is destroying the planet, destroying communities. We cannot go on with the present politics, and Jim mentioned the beginning, the wars, and our system is broken. And we cannot solve the problem remaining in the same system. So we need a new paradigm, and there I feel optimistic, but also I feel concerned, because as I said, in the case of astronomy, it took more than a century for paradigm to change. Scientists are saying we have a decade. We hardly have a decade. So how can we? But then what gives me optimism is people like you, communities like you, groups like you. I think of Kate Raworth in Oxford, an economist. They call her the new Adam Smith, who is proposing the Dow-Nut economics, economics within limits, and respecting socio-economic, ecological limits, and So there are people charting the new path, we need to change. Maybe allow me to give also an element of optimism here. Maybe I can, Michael, anticipating the things that we have been doing around Laudato Si. We created, Pope Francis launched the Laudato Si action platform, involving everyone. We put 7 sectors called, families, beginning with families, then parishes, dioceses, schools, universities, hospitals, economy, businesses, and agricultural farms. Then hospitals, healthcare centers, and 7th would be religious orders like the Jesuits or Franciscans, those of you are familiar, religious orders in the Catholic Church. And we propose to them 7 Laudato Si goals in a very holistic way. Something like the SDGs, but much more holistic. Cry of the earth, cry of the poor, ecological economics, lifestyle changes, education, spirituality, and communitarian action as the climax, And then we to ask them, in 7 years, can a school, a university, a family, a parish become sustainable, or a Laudato Si community, And we already have thousands of universities, thousands of schools, and the element of optimism or hope I see there was Harvard study. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, called the 3.5%. And this study, very important study, they keep on updating it every year. They analyzing how changes happened in human history. They say no change ever came from above, all changes began grassroots. Then they put pressure on those in power, and things had to change. And they quote several examples. The most recent example they quote is how the Berlin Wall came down. And because people, young people thought we don't need this wall that separates us, separation. And their number grew. The group of young people, and one day the wall came down, and we can think of Martin Luther King or or Mahatma Gandhi, or I think of Jesus Christ, who began with 12 apostles. So with a small group, we can change. And the study says if we can get 3.5%, we have the critical mass for change. Then we need to work up to 21 to 24% for community change. Then change is inevitable. But already with 3.5% change begins. It's irreversible, So that's what gives me hope. Like I said, we don't have time, just a decade. But then we can probably, with the new economic, political, and I wouldn't say just one economic paradigm. We need to have thousands of economic paradigms, because they are more suited to local communities. And so we need all this, new models everywhere. Then probably we will reach the critical mass. And there I would also insist we need to be strategic, so just not leaving things, for chance. And because I see on the other side, those who make money, creating wars, or the oil companies, they're also strategic. And sometimes we are too naive. I think we need to be even smarter, and we need to get organized. And the world is of everyone. So the holy anchor I spoke of at the beginning, and that should turn into creative energy. And this is what gives me hope. All said and done, there is a lot of goodness within us. There is that element of tenderness. I am a Don Bosco Salesian priest. Sorry for mentioning it, but then I mentioned his name because he was one who was born in North Italy, 1815. He was born, so nearly a couple of centuries ago, and he. We have this wonderful examples, a priest who left everything and began working for children on the street. He organized them, and now we are in 135 countries around the world. I think of Africa, where we run thousands of schools, and technical schools and vocational schools, and but Don Bosco said, and he worked with that time even young children used to be put in jails and even condemned to death, and his job was to accompany them. And he said, in every child, in every boy, girl, there is an element of goodness. And he says, you have to find that and enter there. That's the keyhole. Then the person changes. So I am convinced that, all of us, there's basic goodness in humanity. And we need to find that, key point, enter there, that keyhole, and enter there. And from there, the whole person, all communities can change, but strategically, not just leaving it, naively, but then together we can change. Yeah, so that's what I would respond, Michael, to the question of, the conceptual, the new paradigm we need, and we need to work towards that. Yeah.
Thank you, Father.
Thank you.
I like the emphasis on strategic plan, and also being open to being spirit guided and organic opportunities that are showing up around the world. And that dance between what wants to emerge with what was planned and intended. We need to be open to both. But the absence of the strategic is troubling.
On a positive note, I was thinking that it's been almost 10 years since the encyclical came out now.
Yeah, 2015. Yes.
Yeah, and I think you had a 5-year anniversary, and it's going to be a 10-year anniversary soon. I was wondering if you talked about thousands. I'm sure there's been some remarkable progress. I was wondering if you could just speak to some of the progress and what your hope is for the next, the next 5 years coming up. For Laudato Si, what what has been learned from it, and where do you see it going?
Yeah, no, thank you. Laudato Si came out in 2015, and not because I'm a fan of Pope Francis, but I can say it has made a big difference, huge difference. I feel very humbled when Ban Ki-moon came to the Vatican, to the dicastery afterwards, and he had gone to see the Pope. Afternoon, he came to our ministry, our department, and he said, he had just retired, so he was just touring around the capitals to thank people. And he said, I told Pope Francis, thanks to Laudato Si that came out in 2013 in the month of June, that in December 2013, the Paris Agreement was possible. You can imagine, the impact of the encyclical, two things I would mention about Laudato Si, and both of which in a way you mentioned, Michael. One was the Laudato Si movement, which was born around the same time in the Philippines, and they had a very, very bad hurricane. And Pope Francis, I remember, as soon as he became Pope, he went to visit that place. I forget the name of the typhoon that, where thousands of people died. And a group of young people came together, they said, and first they called it the Catholic Climate Covenant, Climate Movement. It was a movement, Catholic Climate Movement, Global Catholic Climate Movement, GCCM. Then as soon as after Laudato Si came out, it became the Laudato Si movement. And that has grown around the world. And, led by young people, they have almost every country in the world, so that's a beautiful example of an entire movement being born, inspired by Laudato Si. Then what Tom also highlighted, the strategic plan is what I call the Laudato Si action platform. I already mentioned that. And that again is a very ambitious program that in 7 years, and I think of, in the US, for example, I know Loyola Chicago has joined it, Georgetown University has joined it, and many universities around the world, Athenaeum in Manila in the Philippines, they have joined. Just say some examples, and we are hoping that with every year passing, more, we can keep on doubling, and right now it's still a drop in the ocean, so we can grow, exponentially and reach the critical mass. So we do have a very strategic plan involving everyone, and we are also hoping to team with other religions. If you remember this time when Pope Francis went to Indonesia, he signed a declaration with a Muslim Imam of Jakarta, and on just 2 points. One is about peace, religions coming together to create peace, and religions coming together to rebuild Earth, our common home. So I think this is again the new arena for religions to come together. It's just not the Catholic Church. We also have other churches, and so I hope churches can come together, and religions all said and done. We are something like 83% of humanity. So that we are very secularized, but then all said and done, nearly 80% of humanity belongs to one religious faith or another. So if religious traditions can come together, I think things can change. So I would say we need to strategize and then create these alliances. And we in the dicastery, our style has been to go beyond the church, or Earth is common home of everyone. So we need to work with everyone, other religions, but even those who don't believe in God, there's no problem, because but we live together in a common home, So I hope these are the alliances we need to create and strategically work together, come together. So I feature there. Though, as I said, there is always concern. Time is running out. It is indeed running out. And the sad thing is we don't even realize the gravity, I feel at times also depressed, anxious, because I think the greatest challenge we have faced is this, in the history of humanity. The very home that is hosting us is falling apart. And all the rest is possible. We can have peace only when there's a common home to live in. we can have economic growth only when the home is livable. Like, my heart goes to the people in Florida right now. And I was reading the mayor saying one-storied homes can turn into coffins. There again, where the poor people are hit most, So all that is saying that if we don't take care of Earth as a common home and keep it and take care of it, all the rest is not possible. And because I insist on this, because sometimes environment comes as the last, we have many important things and last reflection on the environment. For me, just the other way around. We know cosmologically the way Earth was created, and as I said in the meditation, humanity came very, very late. I mean, for 99% of the planet's history, we were not around because this garden had to be created in some way, it took, the first 4 billion years even for, vegetation to begin. And so this home, and it's the same logic also in Genesis, Adam and Eve come only on the very last day when the garden has been prepared. So yeah, this is what I think we need to, put Earth first. And then St. Francis, who called Earth Mother Earth, and we all come from Mother Earth. So I think even for Christianity, religions, a lot to recover, this intimate connection with Mother Earth. And when I celebrate Mass, 2 things I do. One is I invite people to read the book of God, which is creation. So we give them 7 minutes thinking of the 7 days of creation. They just walk around, and I invite them to see, to touch, to hear. And every time it is a transformative experience, It changes the way you look at the natural world, and that's important. The second thing, whenever we pray the Our Father, we hold hands together, because we say, of course, Jesus taught us we have a common Father in heaven, but we also have a common Mother Earth. We forget that. And that's what makes us sisters and brothers, Then the tragedy that we kill each other, we wage wars, forgetting that we are in a common home, living as a common family, So I think it's not realizing our identity, our true identity. And maybe it's too late by the time we realize we have destroyed our common home. We have destroyed our human family and communities, that's I mean that's where I feel the challenge is this, because I saw in one of the comments, I think it's because we have put other things, we have created other gods, not that God has abandoned us. The Christian God is in the midst of technical problems. Can you hear me, Michael?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
You're very faint.
Yeah. Can you hear me now? Yes.
Yep, that's better.
Yeah, thank you. Because my earphones are charge is over. Yeah, it's very simple. So now this I think what we need to recover, I think because we have created false gods. Our gods are economic wealth or consumerism. So until and unless we recover the true gods and the true values, which is solidarity, sharing, caring, all these beautiful virtues we need to recover. Things won't change.
Well, thank you, Father Josh. And as we bring Jim back in to help us close out the program, I would just ask a final question of you. Where do you see the paradigm shift that is so desperately needed coming from?
Yeah, brilliant question. And I see it coming probably from where we don't expect, not from big people, or I don't see it coming from universities yet. I already mentioned young people, children. It moved my heart, just before COVID, when children came onto the streets. Not like 1968 university students coming to our streets, not faculties coming to the streets, children coming to the streets. And they said, no, earth is not yet to use and throw, that their future is in danger, that we need not climate change, but system change. Some of the placards was that. So there I see hope. I see indigenous communities. And in 2019, in the Vatican, and thanks to Pope Francis, we had an Amazon Synod. The entire church reflecting on the Amazon. We call top scientists, but then the main people were indigenous leaders. And following the Synod, Pope Francis went to Canada. And unfortunately, I think it was not published much. Pope Francis asked pardon to the indigenous communities, the humility of this Pope, and there he said again, it's as Michael said a couple of times in the past, it was always mixed with empires. It was the Spanish Empire, the Portuguese Empire, which never used the church for colonization. I think of what the English did with Anglican Church, for example, and I think of Gandhi, who fell in love with Christ, but he said, I love Christ, but not the Christians, because the Christians he saw those who were agents of colonization, So I see hope in indigenous communities coming together, women groups, NGOs, and so these are the groups I see right now. Also interfaith, interreligious collaboration, I should say. It is really coming into prominence. We managed to create, even in the United Nations, a faith alliance. And so when there are COPs, faith religions come together, we speak out. Yeah, so right now, as I see it, my sort of apprehension is we are still to move economy, politics, the big players. So, and allow me to say this, it was always Thomas Kuhn who said, we can go on criticizing the existing paradigm and keep on pointing out its defects and drawbacks. But he says, unless another new paradigm, stronger than the previous one, is formed, the other one will keep on, will be always in vogue. And if a new, stronger paradigm comes, it will automatically push out the old one. Both cannot exist together. So I think the onus is on us to create a new paradigm, in everything. Economics, politics, spirituality, education, activism, even in the world of art and music, and we need all, because human being is made up of all these components. So so we need to bring all these, make sure all these components, like when we create an aeroplane, we put all these components together, then the plane is created. It's a mechanistic example, but I think even in the sense here it can make sense, So we need to create all these components together. And then a new paradigm will automatically push out the existing one. And I hope against hope that paradigm is in the making, and our meeting today is a confirmation of that.
So Father Joshtrom, I know you have great humility, and I was just trying to mention before, just if people are interested in what you're doing and where the movement is going, I know you have this book, The 10 Green Commandments. I think you're possibly writing another book.
Yeah.
And maybe on integral ecology. I was wondering if you could point people to resources that they could not just read Laudato Si, but what is going on for your work today, that, what you've been doing recently. Just want to point people to some of your work and where you see things going in 2025 and beyond, that you can just briefly point people to some resources.
Yeah, I will very briefly, Michael, I know time is running out. You mentioned the 10 Green Commandments of Laudato Si, which based on Laudato Si is proposing new commandments for humanity, like Moses, but very modestly. And I'm very humbled the way that the book is going. It has had several editions, one in the US. It got translated into Arabic, into Spanish, into Chinese, into Korean. into Swahili, into Portuguese, into French, and already a dozen languages, and maybe another dozen preparation. So that is God's work, and because I think that it shows the relevance of work on Laudato Si. Right now, I'm also working on a book on ecological sin. 7 ecological sins, from 10 green commandments to 7 ecological sins, and the second one on ecological conversion, but a very integral conversion. And the third one, hopefully within a couple of years, on ecological virtues. And I already have 12 of them listed, but then they could grow. So saying that a lot of work is there to do, and but then I think the strength is in creating alliances, and I'm not just saying it for the sake of saying. The only way forward is that. The only way forward is to rediscover our unity. That together, the we can change the world. Very often, and I think I want to also mention this, we stress a lot on the I. And that's what oil companies did. They said, you can change the world. You are the center. No, that's a false paradigm. I won't change the world. We will change the world. Thank you.
Welcome back, Jim.
I'm aware of the time constraints, so I think that I'll just bring this to a close. As I have a pretty hard stop in about 3 minutes. But I want to thank you, Father Josh, for your remarks. And maybe we can speak offline about some of the issues that I raised and you commented on, including your sense of what is at play as the tenure of Pope Francis begins to draw to a close. He was, I think, the beginning of a new paradigm, and whether that new paradigm continues after his passing, I think is a real question that is already being wrestled with behind the scenes in Rome and elsewhere. And I would just say I just spent a couple of days with Martin Palmer, who was so instrumental in Laudato Si and many other aspects of the environmental maturation, I would say, of the Catholic Church. And we spoke of you, and I'm sure he would want me to send his best regards.
Thank you.
So, Tom, why don't you close us out and tee up tomorrow, or Michael?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and talk about Brother Don, who's going to be with us tomorrow, Michael?
Tomorrow, we're going to have a session with Brother Don Bassan, who has been a spiritual director for over 45 years. And he's a teacher of spiritual direction. And I think that, Jim, you're a big fan of Jung. And one of the things Jung did is not only did brilliant work, but he worked with patients. And he could see what was going on in the subconscious of the German people a decade before the World War, when the rise of Hitler. And I think that Brother Don is going to speak about the spiritual roots of the ecological crisis, and also how he sees ways of it being healed. But he's going to speak to the problems very directly, and how we need to overcome the spiritual underpinnings of that desert that Father Josh spoke about. And he's going to be speaking about it not just as an intellectual and a philosopher, but someone who's worked with hundreds of people who have worked with hundreds of other people, and understanding what's going on deep within the depths of people who are struggling within themselves and struggling to make a better world, and what the greatest challenges are. So it's a very practical, down-to-earth conversation about what we need to do to move forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Tom. And Father Josh, thank you, as always, for your deep compassion and wisdom on these complex matters. And we all wish you and the Vatican all the best in these very complex and troubled times. That'll bring us to a close, everyone. You can join the after chat You'll see the link in the chat box. You received it in your Zoom reminder for today. And then tomorrow we'll convene our 4th of 5 sessions on the future of God. Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.
You all.